When it comes to hydrology and the effect of a clear-cut logging on hydrology, what we are seeing now is the worst situation that you could possibly have. We have already lost most of our forest cover, the most powerful natural protection against flood risk and drought risk in this province. And that's exactly what ended up causing the 2018 flood event in the downtown area of Grand Fork that have caused damage to over 400 homes and many businesses.
Thousands of British Columbians being forced to leave their homes as swollen rivers in the BC interior have spilled over their banks. Now that is causing what some officials are calling a flood that comes once in 200 years.
When it flooded and the bridge was blocked and all I could see was the water and the debris, I was just devastated.
It was overwhelming. It was just breathtaking to think that there's so much loss.
All of this neighborhood, there's about 100 houses total that are being demolished and making way for flood infrastructure. So about 100 families had to find new places to live.
It's unimaginable. What do we do? You know, can't figure out what to do. Where do we go? We're 72 years old. That says we can't borrow money and start rebuilding or buying a house.
It would seem to me that we're all dealing with the result, not the cause. The cause is that the snow's melting really fast in the high country because there's not the canopy of trees that we used to have. And yeah, there may be some changes in weather patterns, but you can't blame it all on the rain.
A couple of 100 years ago, the forest in BC would have been truly referred to as old-growth forest or primary forest. Forest covered the landscape from the lowland all the way to the highest ridges on the mountains. Since the 60s, we ended up excessively clear-cut logging with these machines, and we ended up, as a result of that, losing most of our primary or old-growth forest. I've been studying forest hydrology for the last 30 years, and I focused a lot on the effect of the loss of forest cover via clear-cut logging on flood risk, on drought risk, and landslides. In the last 20 years, BC have turned into a hotbed of flooding, landslides, and droughts all over this province. I have made the decision to work quietly for a couple of decades, publishing in the top journals. But there was a time where I decided I can't hold it anymore. I'll have to come out and talk. It is my duty to actually tell the story of my science, as scary as it might be, inconvenient as it might be. Therefore, I cannot continue to be silent. In 2018, a flood event happened in the Grand Fork area. That's a high-profile research site, and this is why I got interested in it. I wonder how far the water came up here during the 2018 flood event, right here, you know? The story that is being told to the public about what caused the 2018 flood event is that there was a lot of snow on the mountains, followed by sudden hot weather and heavy rain. But our research has shown that these factors on their own do not explain the scale of this disaster. Wayne, watch this, right?
Oh, yeah.
These are signs of how high floodwater came during 2018. Yeah, I'm sure it's higher than this, but you could see it at least in here. This debris in here is debris left over by water running through here. There's another one. You see how high the water went up in there? That's how high it was during the 2018 flood event.
Flooding is not abnormal to Grand Forks. The 2018 flood, which was substantial when both the rivers flooded, causing horrific damage in this community. I saw my family, my daughter lose her home in the flood, and the anguish that we saw from the folks in North Ruckle and other areas here that were badly flooded and basically lost their homes.
I don't think we can get in there. This used to be all houses in here. Some of the people grew up here. You know, there were families and retired people, more of affordable housing on this side of the bridge here.
The good news was last year, the new diking that's been done, pump stations, interceptors and piping, it worked. So it's one thing if government spent $60 million, $50 million, and it didn't work. Then you have something to be concerned about. The goal was it was going to work, and it did. You know, if we had not done the work, we would have been wet again, no, without a doubt.
The recent records over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the flood level is getting closer and closer to the 2018 flood every other year, which really means that there is something that has happened that have actually intensified the flood regime.
Yeehaw! Here we go.
We're heading out to the headwaters of the Kettle River Basin.
Yes, there's heavy logging.
Everywhere in there, right?
Everywhere.
All right, I think we've got a solid plan now. Let's rock and roll. I have done 24,000 kilometers of traveling, touring the watersheds across the entire 8,000 square kilometer Kettle River Basin. And I was lucky to have field guides that have spent their lifetime living in Grand Forks, working with the forest industry. People like Wayne and Stan.
Lovely day, lovely. I don't know who asked me if I could take this guy out. And I said, who is he? Well, he's a professor in the University of UBC. I took him to every little watershed, big watershed, and we had fun doing it on top of that, eh? Where we're going today, I logged everywhere. Every mountainside. 18,000 kilometers of logging road. That's what I know. Because I felled trees for 46, 47 years. That's got to be close to 600 hectare block of clear-cut logging. And as an old logger, I have no words for the size of these blocks. You know, when I started, I was selective logging for probably all the 60s. Come the 70s, they started clear cuts, eh? But they were small, eh? You know, like 20 acres or 10 acres or, you know, stuff like that. Not this 600 hectares.
Wow, it is sad, indeed.
Very.
We're standing in the middle of 360-degree bowl, surrounded by mountains. And as you could see there, all of them has been clear-cut. All of them, and continuously. And just think about it. When you remove the trees, you end up with more snow on the cut block. There is no trees to shade the snow. There's more energy available for melting that snow. But the most interesting part of the hydrology story in this case is that this is happening in the better parts of the entire Kettle River basin.
Yeah.
Might be all right to walk.
Yeah. Be careful, you're gonna fall in the water. You got too many hats on.
The Kettle River Basin is about 10,000 square kilometer drainage. It's a huge drainage. The water runs north to south along 4 sub-drainages: the West Kettle, the Main Kettle, the Boundary, and the Granby. They're all simultaneously discharging into the Main Kettle River that runs from west to east until it gets to downtown Grand Forks. So what you are seeing there in terms of cut blocks, one next to each other, is very typical if you have an airplane and you're flying over the entire Kettle River Basin, particularly West Kettle and Main Kettle. 2/3 of that 8,000 square kilometer has been actually clear-cut logged. So where we are now, we are at the headwaters of the Main Kettle. And this creek coming in here is typical of many other headwater creeks. The cut rate is so high that excess clear-cut logging end up increasing the magnitude of the high flows, the frequency of the high flows, and the duration of the high flows to dump all of that excess runoff into the Kettle River. Imagine how many smaller tributaries bringing runoff from the left and right, all the way from the headwaters of the Main Kettle. It's about 200 kilometers from Grand Forks. And imagine you're logging simultaneously in all of them. Should anyone be actually surprised that we are flooded in 2018? If you read my research that has been peer-reviewed, nobody should be surprised, because the Kettle River Basin have been abused in terms of disturbances to a point where the watershed is no more resilient, cannot take it. Before logging, that 2018 flood may have been once in a 100-year, once in a 200-year flood event. Now you're experiencing it once every maybe 5 years, once every 10 years. It becomes so many times more frequent. And remember that this is happening in the background of climate change, which is already making the floods much more intense and much more frequent. So how old is this regrowth and this cut block?
Well, I'm guessing the stuff right alongside this road here is maybe 15 years old.
The government has mandated planting the trees after logging. And yes, we do plant trees, but coniferous trees are very slow in their regrowth. This is a 10-year-old regen. Regen is the regenerated forest, either through replanting or through natural regeneration. This 10-year-old regen, there is almost zero recovery in the first 10 years, 20 years, up to 30 years. It takes at least 60 to 80 years for the regen to regain the hydrologic functionality, the recovery of what used to be there before we logged. There is no doubt that if you walk in an old forest that has not been logged, it's going to be wetter and cooler because that old forest shades the ground and keeps the ground moist. As you could see in there, these cut blocks are facing south. Of course, the old forest that used to be there used to shade the snow. When the snow is shaded, the snow melts slower. And when the snow melts slower, it has a chance to infiltrate into the soil, recharges the groundwater, and that groundwater comes in handy when we need it most during the driest period of the year. Now, if you remove the trees, you remove the shading, that snow on the south-facing slopes, it melts faster and in a more synchronized ways, and we were left out of the slow recharge as a result of the melt. You could see how logging the trees not only increases the flood risk during the flood season, but increases the drought risk during the driest period of the year. And this is why we're going to be living under a heightened risk to flooding and to droughts for decades to come, because by nature, the recovery is very slow. What I'm really anxious about moving forward is the extent to which the diking system that have been built in Grim Fork is going to actually save the day in the years and decades to come. They're spending 50 to 60 million already. I hope that it will solve their problems. Time alone will tell, but I'm not that optimistic because water will always win. I mean, it's a major investment, so I'm sure it's done properly. But what I'm worried about is this. From 2018 to now, they kept on logging. That actually going to cause, in the years to come, flood levels that are larger than 2018 flood event.
Ouch.
And as long as we keep on clear-cut logging the headwaters, that's going to actually continue to increase runoff. That increased runoff will carry with it more sediments from the headwaters, which will end up actually settling at the bottom of the river in here. The bottom of the channel is actually raising up. It chokes the carrying capacity of the flow of the dikes, and this is how dikes end up breaching.
Yeah, and water's got to go somewhere.
Exactly, and it will be breaching. And therefore, I can't help it but thinking, would this dike withstand the new level of runoff as a result of the extra logging that you keep doing?
I can't answer that question.
I'm telling you, as a hydrologist,
yeah,
I'm afraid even these dikes, they are likely over time to be breached and flooding these so-called now protected residential area, which really means that these dikes are giving the false sense of security when it comes to mitigating against the floods. The issue that I had with flood management strategies that are focused only on the lowland and the downstream is that it's only addressing the symptoms. But the root cause of the increase in flood risk comes in from the headwaters. The research that we've been doing so far illustrate that clear-cut logging has contributed to the severity of the 2018 flood event.
Well, you know, as a mayor in rural British Columbia, you know, logging has been an extremely important part of the economy of rural BC. And of course, I don't know if stopping logging is the answer.
And
but
that's
I think
not
the
what
way
that's not what I'm calling
No,
for.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But we need to log differently.
Yes.
The way
Yes.
we did it years and years ago may not be what we need to do today because the world is changing.
No doubt. There is so much at stake. Like the cost of damage by floods and the damage by droughts is monumental. And the damage to the channel system, to the infrastructure, to potentially loss of lives downstream by flooding and landslides. If you put dollar figures on that, the cost is orders of magnitude more than the logging industry bring to the economy. And if we don't figure that out, I am sorry, we have failed and we continue to fail miserably. What happened in Grand Fork is typical of what has been happening and will continue to happen in many other places across all of BC as a result of forest management policy that focused only on the timber value exclusively, while paying lip service to all the other values. And therefore, the only way out of this quagmire is to rehaul and redesign our forestry policy to account for all the values and the virtues that the forestry brings to society. Water is at the top of that list of values. The number one thing that I would like to see changed is a paradigm change in the way we log the trees. There are so many ways that we could possibly log the trees that will end up having way less effect on the hydrology than the default clear-cut logging. And the only sensible thing to do is to stay out of the little primary forest that we have, forest that has not been logged, and keep focusing on forest management on secondary forests using the alternative logging practices to clear cutting. In my opinion, it's about time to abandon clear-cut logging as a practice. Enough is enough because the clear-cut logging, although it's cheaper and it creates more profits in the pockets of the industry, it actually comes at a great cost to the watershed health, to the ecosystem, to the infrastructures. So that's the key in there. I'm telling my technical and scientifically based opinion as it is to colleagues of mine in the Faculty of Forestry, to the media, to the politicians, to colleagues in the profession that are making decisions, and that's my duty. What they do with it, it's up to them.
We will suffer financially for the rest of our lives from the flood. The place we had was going to be paid off in 10 years. I was going to be 58 years old and mortgage-free. Now we have a 25-year mortgage. I'm going to be like 73 years old before it's paid off, so retirement isn't an option.
No, we don't want to leave here. No, this is our home for 50 years. We want to stay here, but they say it's not an option. So.
And I think it'll probably, be like this every year, and maybe worse every year. So what the city's gonna do, I don't know, they gotta spend lots of money, I guess. Make the dikes higher. Yeah, what can you do? That's a tough one.